My fibrocartilaginous pleat! Oh! My sweet, sweet baby hallux! Oh! My sesamoids! Oh, is that? Yep! I can feel my proximal phalanx! My flexion, it's gone. My career as a foot model is ruined.
I heard you hit your toe.
How'd you get here so fast? It literally just happened.
Don't worry, I'm a physiotherapist. Now, before we go any further, have you or any loved ones been exposed to grass in the last 5 months? Okay. This is more serious than I thought. Take a breath. Take a breath. Take a breath. This is turf toe.
Am I gonna live?
No. Shit.
Well, this just in, Davante Adams did not practice today. He was out there on the sideline in sweats, was not part of the actual practice.
Hey everybody, thank you for tuning in. You're watching A Physio Named Jonah. That's this guy. Today we're talking about turf toe. It's an injury that always makes the NFL fan in me go, It's a toe! And the physiotherapist in me go, I want to try and explain this injury using as little scientific jargon as possible, avoid all the complicated words, and just get to the bottom of what it is and what's happening to the structure in the area. Alright, we're going to start with everybody's favorite part, anatomy. Please don't leave the video. It's turf toe, but which toe is it? It's the big toe. Turf toe is used to describe a hyperextension injury to the first metatarsophalangeal joint. Please don't leave, don't go. Don't worry, we're going to break it down, we're going to go into what it means. The first metatarsophalangeal joint is where your big toe meets your foot, and you're getting a hyperextension injury there, or it's getting stretched all the way back. You know that sink where you go to your friend's house and they have the one piece in the middle and it goes up? It's a metal ball with that little piece on top of it that rolls around. This is kind of what this joint looks like. The toe end, or the end that's connected to your toe, is the round part on top, while the part connecting your foot to your toe is that ball that it moves around on top of. Mostly, what this joint is doing is going up and down. You're mostly just turning the water on and off. What's important to remember is that when you turn on that sink, what keeps you from putting it through the back of the wall is that metal rim on the end. The top of the faucet can't go past that metal rim at the end. In the toe, unlike the sink, we have connective tissues that keep us from doing this. It's restricted from going too far down or too much into that flex position by structures that are on the top. So the top structures keep it from stretching all the way down. It's an extensor tendon, or a tendon that causes the toe to move up, that helps restrict it from moving all the way down. Connective tissues on the top of this joint keep the toe from moving too far down. The big ones that we want to focus on are the structures on the bottom of this joint. That's structures that are running along the bottom of this joint connecting your toe to your foot that keep it from performing too much of an extension movement or bending back. These tissues in particular are some muscular tendons. A tendon is where muscle connects to bone. It connects to this connective tissue called a tendon, connects to the connective tissue. This muscle can activate or contract to pull the toe down into that flexion movement or move it down, bend it down away from you. However, it also restricts the toe from going too far the other way. It keeps the sink from going too far to the back. It keeps you from breaking the sink. Now, these little bones inside of it are important too, and I wouldn't include this if it wasn't important, but there's small sesamoid bones underneath. If you need an example of a sesamoid bone, look no further than the kneecap. When they're inside of a tendon like this, they help improve the mechanical advantage of this, and in some cases like this one with the big toe, they help bear weight. We bear a lot of weight through the bottom of our big toe. Having this extra bit of bony support here is incredibly helpful, and also helps to explain why this injury can be so debilitating. So that's a bit of a rundown of the anatomy of the situation. We're looking at the joint that connects your big toe to the rest of your foot, and it's stabilized by connective tissues all around it, but the big one is the connective tissue that runs below the joint or prevents it from bending back.
But as you can tell, the helmet is on, he's putting the gloves on. Not sure if he's going to try to get in, but he's definitely trying to warm up a little bit, guys.
His catch set up first and goal.
Turf toe was originally coined back in the 70s by these researchers who were working with a football team at the time and just kept wondering, what's happening right now? What keeps happening to these kids' toes? This was around the time that the NFL and more sports were switching from grass into the AstroTurf. You can call it an improvement, but if you played on the old AstroTurf, you probably know it wasn't much of an improvement. It was god-awful. Using the new turf as well as the new cleats, you could generate more friction, right? What this meant was that in situations where before the toe inside the shoe would have taken grass with it and moved, now that grass isn't moving, the cleat isn't moving, something has to give somewhere when this force is applied. Now it's the structure across the bottom of the toe that's kind of giving out. Alright, let's get into the actual explanation of this injury. Turf toe is forced extension. It's a forced bend back with a force applied at the heel down. Did you get that? We'll go through it. Take a look. So the big toe is bent back as there's a force coming down onto the heel. As you can imagine, this stretches out those tissues running along the bottom of the big toe and can cause tearing in them, and it's the degree of tearing that determines the degree of injury. But that's the mechanism of injury. Those structures along the bottom of the toe in a vulnerable position, and then an extra force is applied. The other way of saying this is that faucet tap from before, it gets reefed up so hard into that bend back movement that the connective tissues that were holding it there from moving too far back, they get torn because the force was just that strong. So the athlete had that moment where their big toe was fixed into that bent back position and the force was applied to cause an injury to those tendons that run along the bottom of the toe, right? Now what happens? What we expect is for the toe to be swollen, painful, and stiff.
And a little bit of pain, and you know, it's tough with a with a toe injury and the type of player I am, and what my game is kind of based on is explosion and things like that. So if I can't get out there and really do my thing.
That is a toe. Get back in the game. I hear you, NFL fan. I hear what you're saying, but it is going to make it difficult. Think about it. Let's break it down. Every time you run, every time you take a step, you're putting the toe in the same position that it was injured in. This is going to stretch out those fibers that were just torn. If you don't allow a tissue to heal and you keep stretching it over and over and over again, it can never get the healing that it actually needs. Now imagine how it's going to be trying to get back to actually performing, not just practicing and doing it, but performing at a sport level. When every time you put that stretch through a compromised tissue, it's creating pain first of all, but you're also not getting the same amount of push that you normally would. In a high performance sport like football at the NFL level, this is going to be so challenging, and it's going to be such a change from the normal speed and power you're normally able to create through the bottom of that foot. Let's jump into our last segment, the recovery.
It is a major injury, so it's something that we got to pay attention to and make sure we monitor in the correct way to make sure it's not something that gets re-aggravated later on in the season, or I come back a little too early and really mess the thing up.
It really depends on how bad the original injury was. When you have that stretch to those structures, it can be a tear of a few, a lot, or all of the fibers with that connective tissue. As you can imagine, if it's just a few of the fibers that are torn, so that connective tissue is just sort of stretched out and torn a little bit, it's not that bad. It may only last a few days, and as an NFL fan or a sports fan, we may never even hear about it. The main treatment for this is going to be pretty straightforward, and it's Rice principles. For those of you at home, a lot of acute injuries, they follow these principles. You want to rest, ice, compress, and elevate. You want to give it some time to recover, put some ice on to decrease the inflammation, compression for the same reason, elevation, again, you don't want more swelling going to the area. If it's not that bad of an injury, you didn't tear that many fibers, this may go really quickly. After this, they're going to try some individual drills to see what they can do on that foot without creating more pain. Obviously, you don't want to make things worse, but they'll probably get back to practice and start going back to game speed relatively quickly. That's the lightest. Let's go to the worst possible outcome. Let's say now you have a complete rupture of the connective tissue or tendon on the bottom of that toe. This is definitely going to take surgery. That means that they're probably going to be out for the year, and yes, this may be because of just a toe. However, most of the players that we hear about with turf toe probably fall somewhere in between these two. They've torn more than a few fibers, but that tendon or connective tissue is still there. It hasn't been completely torn. What does the rehab look like now? Well, in the acute phase, it's going to be pretty much the same. They're still going to have to do that rest, ice, compression, elevation. You want to get it moving as quickly as possible, but you also want to let the swelling come down and respect the time that the structures need to heal. Once the initial irritation is kind of down, we want to start with some movements. Normally this is going to be just range of motion movements or moving the toe as you're able to without creating more pain. After that range of motion phase, once that's not too bad, then they're probably going to start adding a little bit of strengthening through it in a non-irritating way. Again, huge in all of this phase is not irritating the tissues further. Once you can move the toe kind of by itself, now you start in weight bearing. Move around in weight bearing, see what we can do. Only after this, when you're able to weight bear, walk, and do these things without creating too much pain or irritation, that we're going to get back to practice. This whole timeline can be from a couple weeks to weeks on end, spanning over a month. We've seen those athletes who get out for an extended period of time with this turf toe injury because you can easily see how it would be re-aggravated, right? If you progress back to practice, if you progress back to a game too quickly because you're thinking, toe, it's just a toe, you're going to keep re-irritating those structures and stretching it over and over every time you run, and it's never going to properly heal. Picture that faucet pulling on those connective tissues. That's what's happening when a receiver is out there running a route or a running back is trying to make a cut. My hope now with this video is that you can look at that NFL fan inside of you. It is a toe! And you can say, well, it is a hyperextension injury to your first metatarsophalangeal joint, so it's going to take some time. Rest up. Rest up, big guy. Hey everybody, thank you so much for watching. I do truly appreciate it. Now that we're here at the end of the video, why not think about those burning questions that you've been meaning to ask a physiotherapist? Drop them in the comment section below. Let me know what you thought of the video. Hit that like and subscribe button, and I will see you at the next video.